Good afternoon. My name is Bob Rochon. I am the Mayor of the community of Fundy, Albert. So this is a presentation on the general operating budget and utility budgets to provide residents and taxpayers a better understanding of the components of both the general operating and utility budgets. If you have any questions in relation to what you see in the coming slides, don't hesitate to send your question along to our Chief Administrative Officer, Linda Sabarin, at cao@fundyalbert.ca. This is the outline of the budget presentation. I'll begin by going through the elements of the general operating budget, a comparison of the numbers from 2023 to 2024, and an explanation of what shared and local costs are and what the components of the budget fall under each category. Then I'll look at the property assessments and how these were arrived at, followed by how these translate into the tax rates you find on your tax bill. I'll then provide an explanation for the increases in the Fundy Albert general operating budget, and then how our Fundy Albert tax rates compare with those of neighboring municipalities. I'll then review some of the upcoming initiatives and projects that are planned for Fundy Albert that are included in the budget. Lastly, on the topic of the general operating budget, if you're interested in knowing more or to better understand the elements of the budget, where you can find that information. In the second part of the presentation, we'll go through the utility budgets for the residents who receive either or both utilities of water and or wastewater services, the charges, how these compare to the 2023 utility rates, and the reasons for any increases where there are some. Then we'll go through some of the projects that are or will be impacting utilities in each of the former incorporated municipalities. So let's take a look at the 2024 general operating budget. I'd like to begin by saying that we were late getting the budget process started in 2023. The establishment of the tax rates begins by looking at the projected expenditures to meet the demands of the municipality. When the total revenues required are known, the local government then looks at non-tax revenues, such as fees, sales of services, building permits, and any surplus monies that carry forward from 2 years ago. We also look at the community funding grant, and then the remainder of the revenues is collected through what is called the warrant. Council then examines the impact the rates have on taxpayers and makes adjustments necessary to strike a balance between increased costs, demands for improved services, and the impact on rates. The general operating budget for Fundy Albert for 2024 was approved at a special council meeting on January 6th, 2024. The total operating budget required was identified at $5,995,121. Revenues totaling that amount were identified as coming from the community funding grant from the province of New Brunswick. In 2024, this amount was $242,857. That's a decrease of $32,057 from the amount of $274,914 in 2023. We also look at non-tax revenue of $767,232, which is derived from previous year surpluses in 2022 from all subunits, the sale of services to others, fees charged for use of facilities, revenues from the arena and pool, and construction permits. The remainder of the revenues required to be collected are collected through the warrant, or the amount collected through local taxes, which in 2024 was $4,975,033. Slide 5 shows the various sources of revenue that make up that total operating budget of $5,985,121 and is shown through this pie chart. This slide shows the projected budget expenditures that add up to that $5,985,121 in the various categories in more detail. And they are based on the different categories of expenditures. And I'll provide a bit of an explanation of what each one of those is. So, for general government services, that includes the cost associated with your council, the general administrative service costs, and grants and contributions. Protective services include the cost of policing, cost of fire protection, emergency measures, bylaw enforcement, and building inspections. Transportation services includes the cost of public works for the three former incorporated municipalities, public works buildings and equipment, streets and infrastructure maintenance in the three former incorporated municipalities, summer and winter maintenance in the three former incorporated municipalities, street lighting in the three former incorporated municipalities, and a small number of street lights in Lower Coverdale, and street signs in all of Fundy, Albert. Environmental health services include solid waste collection and disposal, public health, in our case, the cost of maintenance of a local cemetery in the community of Hillsborough, and mosquito control in the Lower Coverdale area. Next, we have environmental development services, which includes planning and zoning costs, land development, including beautification, community and social development, economic development, and tourism. Then we have recreational and cultural services, which includes recreational facilities, parks and playgrounds, ball fields, arena, and pool. There are also costs associated for a local museum, which the municipality owns, and that's the only reason why there are costs associated with that museum, and also some costs associated with the public library that is located in Hillsborough. And the last category is fiscal services, and that includes debt charges, so that's principal and interest payments, bank charges for banking for the entire municipality. If there are any deficits from previous year budgets, that would be shown as a fiscal expense, but there were none in 2024. And last but not least, there are short-term interest for capital projects. So slide 7 shows a comparison of the 2023 budget to 2024. So we have on the left, we have the budget of $5,179,702 in 2023 and the overall budget of $5,985,121. So there was an increase there of $778,419. On the right-hand side is the warrant, which is what we collect through local taxes. So on the left-hand side is the 2023 amount of $4,116,546. And in 2024, on the right, the cost is $4,975,033. That's the amount that we had to raise through the warrant in 2024. The difference between 2023 and 2024 for the warrant was $858,487. So slides 8 and 9 are the comparisons by category of expenditures from 2023 to 2024. So each one of the previous categories that I identified, for example, in general government services, there was an increase from 827,360 to in 2024, 1,021,626. So if you look at protection services, those went up as well. We've had cost increases for fire protection and also for policing, bylaw enforcement. So straight across the board, there were increased costs. Transportation, which is mainly for the former incorporated municipalities, those costs have increased as well. And environmental health services, the costs for solid waste collection and so on have been increasing. So those are reflected here from 2023 to 2024. On public health, there's actually a decrease in cost, and that's attributed to the fact that the community used to fund part of the rent for a medical clinic and also for the satellite office of the Albert County Community Health Center. Those are no longer paid for by the municipality. So there's actually been a reduction in the cost. Under environmental development, the costs are relatively the same. Under recreation and culture, the costs are less, and then the fiscal costs are approximately the same. So expenditures are classified and are paid by taxpayers based on whether they are a local or a shared cost. The determination of what a local versus shared cost is was the definitions were provided by the province in 2023. This is always subject to review and adjustment by your council. Local costs are only paid by taxpayers who benefit directly from a particular service. Shared costs are those for services that all taxpayers have access to and benefit from. They are paid by all taxpayers. It's important to note that shared costs are paid at by 100% for taxpayers in the former incorporated municipalities and at a 90% rate by other taxpayers. So that which is known as the inside, so the 100% is the inside rate, the basic rate is 90% for the former unincorporated areas. So there are a few examples where the costs for services are both a local and shared cost, and I'll show some examples. So let's take a look at local costs. Examples of local costs, and these are paid directly by each either local district uh, or the former incorporated municipalities, and they are attributed to each one of the budgets or subunits at 100%. And that's the cost of assessment, the cost of policing, animal and pest control, public works. That's all, public works costs are only paid for the by the taxpayers in the former villages only. Street lights, again, former villages only. Street lights, there's a small amount of $480 for the Coverdale Local District. Solid waste collection, solid waste handling. Mosquito control is only paid for by the Coverdale Local District. And beautification is only paid for by the taxpayers in the former incorporated municipalities. And then there is tree maintenance in the former villages only. Shared cost examples, and these are shared between the subunits or either the local districts or the former incorporated municipalities, and those are shared at the 190% rates, either the inside or basic rates as I explained earlier. So we have general government services, grants and contributions, fire protection, emergency measures, street signs, the William H. Steeves Museum, the building only, the cost associated with building because that is a cultural building. Plan 360 costs, the Southeast Regional Service Commission mandated services, tourist bureaus, recreational facilities, any trails, and the Hillsborough Public Library. As I mentioned before, there are examples where they can be both a local and shared costs. As an example, training costs. So there are training costs associated with general government employees, so any of the administrative personnel. Those are paid for by everyone through that shared cost of 100 inside rate and 90% basic rate. But if there is any training for public works employees, because their services only benefit the taxpayers in the former incorporated municipalities, it's only those three former incorporated municipalities that share those costs. Anything in bylaw enforcement, snow removal for private contract, there's a difference between a snow removal cost for a private contract for a municipality as in the snow removal contract in the municipality of Hillsborough. And then if it's a snow removal, a private contract for a recreational facility, because that recreational facility is a shared cost, then the snow removal for the recreational facility is also a shared cost. Principal and interest payments on shared and local debt. So those are treated differently. It's important to note that while some costs are shared, the revenues derived from them is also shared. Examples include the revenues from provision of fire protection services to the Southeast Rural District. And that's a case where if there are any fire protection services provided to the Southeast Rural District, which is a neighboring municipality, they are invoiced through a mutual aid agreement, and any revenues associated with the provision of those services is shared because fire protection is a shared cost. Rental of community halls, rink fees, building permit revenues that we receive from Plan 360, utility transfer revenues from the utility budgets for administrative costs provided by the general operating budget for salaries of administrative personnel, audit, legal, and office costs. All that means is within the utility budgets, which is paid for only by the former incorporated municipalities, there is an element of administrative costs that are built into those budgets. And that is there because there's a requirement to report on that. Those costs at the end of the year are transferred over as revenue to the general operating budget. So it's recognized as revenue, and also the costs associated with audit, legal, and office costs, those are brought back over onto the general operating side as revenue, and it's recognized and is shared. So slide 15 illustrates the assessed property value in each of the subunits. So as you can see, you can take a look at whichever area you're in, either a local district or a former incorporated municipality, and you can see what the assessed value of the total assessed value of each one of those areas, taxation areas, is. In 2024, Council set the non-residential and heavy industrial rate at 1.7 times the residential rate in each taxation area. The rates are then applied against the assessed property value divided by 100, and this is what appears on your tax bill. There are also amounts on your tax bills for a provincial tax and also a cost of assessment that originates from Service New Brunswick. In 2023, there were 8 different tax rates. In 2024, 2 of the 3 tax rates for the former incorporated communities were merged into one. There were also 4 tax rates in the former unincorporated areas that were merged into one. So there are now only 4 separate tax rates where there were previously 8. The goal will be to eventually merge all of the unincorporated areas into one rate and all of the incorporated rates into one. Some of these, because of the difference in the numbers, will take some time to achieve. The Fundy Albert tax base, or the assessed value, has grown by $65,001,500 from 2023 to 2024. This is the result of the development in the municipality, while the majority of it is the result of increase in property assessments. You'll see here a link to a video that explains the property assessment process. And that video is actually on the website at www.fundyalbert.ca under the budget tab. In the next 2 slides, we'll illustrate the residential tax rates for the 8 different taxation areas, including the former villages of Alma, Hillsborough, and Riverside Albert, as well as the portions of the local districts of Alma, Harvey, and Hillsborough, Hopewell, and Coverdale. So you'll notice here what the various tax rates are, and it includes, for comparison purposes, we've included not only the local rate, which is on the left-hand side, but it's called a special levy of 0.4115 cents that the province collects for anyone residing or all taxpayers residing in the former unincorporated areas. And on the right-hand side, the total rate is shown in a dollar value, a dollar and cent value per $100 of assessed value. On slide 19, you'll see the various subunits. Again, these are the taxation areas, the 2024 rate as well as the 2023 rate, and then the percentage change. So if you find wherever your taxation area is, you see what the 2024 rate is, what the 2023 rate is, and what the percent increase is. And again, for transparency purposes, we've shown them for the local district areas, including the 0.4115 cents per $100 of assessed value, where they're applicable. In the former incorporated areas, there is no addition of that 0.4115. This slide illustrates the rate in a graph form. So in a bar graph, you can actually see that in the former village of Alma, the rate has remained the same. The former village of Riverside Albert, the rate has remained the same. The former village of Hillsborough, the rate has gone up. And for the most part, in all of the other local district areas, those costs have gone up. Again, referring back to my previous comment, the goal is to eventually bring all the unincorporated rates to one and eventually bring all the former incorporated areas to one rate as well. So we'll now take a look at the reasons for the increases in the operating budget for Fundy Albert. So in 2023, during the implementation of Local Governance Reform Initiative, a transition facilitator put the budget together for Fundy Albert with limited input from any of the former elected officials or administrative personnel. The result was a budget that did not include provisions for the additional responsibilities that came with governance reform implementation. It quickly became evident that the number of administrative resources put in place in early 2023 were not sufficient for the demands being placed on the municipality and the employees, and that changes needed to be made. For this reason, we are now hiring 2 administrative employees, an assistant clerk office administrator, and an accounting clerk administrative assistant, to be able to handle the additional workload. The workload associated with the administration of the various agreements and contracts was no doubt previously handled by provincial government employees. This workload has now been downloaded to Fundy Albert without the benefit of those additional resources. This includes solid waste collection contracts and associated work, police and fire protection agreements, bylaw enforcement, and dangerous and unsightly premises enforcement. The transition facilitator reduced the rates in the former incorporated areas in 2023 because of the sharing of certain costs that were previously only paid by taxpayers in the former incorporated areas. Logically, when those costs were shared by all taxpayers, the rates in the former villages went down. In hindsight, given what we're now seeing as increases, that should never been allowed to happen. I would also like to point out that the council and the employees' wages for 2024 did not increase from 2023 rates. Like residents, costs for the municipal operations have increased. The cost of fuel, electricity, insurance have increased for the municipal government as well. There are also now expanded responsibilities for bylaw enforcement, obligations for emergency measures planning and response for the entire community, and the management of expanded contracts that are putting a strain on resources. The cost of services purchased by the municipality, including police, have increased. The cost of fire protection has increased, including the need to purchase trunk mobile radio radios, a new fire truck for the Riverside Albert Volunteer Fire Department. The Fundy Albert also pays the Riverview Fire Department for services provided to residents of parts of portions of Ward 5 and all of Ward 6. There was also a significant increase in the cost of a winter maintenance contract in Hillsborough, which went up by approximately 88%. So we'll look at a comparison of the rates in Fundy, Albert. So that was conducted with other southeastern New Brunswick communities, including the towns of Salisbury, Tantramar, Riverview, Shediac, Sussex, and the villages of Straight Shores, Three Rivers, Memramcook, and the rural communities of Maple Hills and the Southeast Rural District. Most of these have local district rates, not all. The city of Moncton, city of Dieppe, and the town of Riverview do not have a local district components. So if we look at the average local district rate, including Fundy Albert, was at 98.6 cents per $100 of assessed value. And this includes the special levy of 0.4115. So the average local district rate is 0.9860, and that translates into 98.6 cents per $100 of assessed value. The average local district rate excluding Fundy Albert was 0.9866. The average municipal rate including Fundy Albert was $1.30.21 per $100 of assessed value. The average municipal rate excluding Fundy Albert was $1.26.76. The high municipal rate for the entire area of southeastern New Brunswick was $1.56.69, which was the community of Alma. So that is an indication that we had the highest rate for any of the former incorporated municipalities. The low municipal rate was the Shediac Parish Village at 0.7942. And the reason I'm told for this was because the Shediac Parish Village had a lot of forest land and a lot of agricultural land. It wasn't a primarily residential area. The high local district rate was Point Dubuque local district in the Dorchester area, which is $1.17.52 per $100 of assessed value. The low local district rate was the local district of Salisbury, which is part of the town of Salisbury municipality. And it's important to note that the reason why I identified that as the town of Salisbury is because there are elements of the Salisbury local district in a number of municipalities. So that one was specific to the town of Salisbury. And if you want to have a look at the rates for all municipalities in New Brunswick, they can be found at the Province of New Brunswick website at the following address. If you go to this site, you can actually see all the various rates for all the municipalities in New Brunswick. I would submit that Fundy Albert's rates are higher than the average, in part because of the number of assets in the form of buildings that it owns. There are 3 municipal offices, one of which is being sold, and several community buildings. While it's nice to have an abundance of facilities, these cost money to power, to heat and cool, to insure, to maintain, and invest in. This, or a future council, will have the challenge of deciding which, if any, can be the subject of a review. Some highlights of plans moving forward include the development of a strategic plan, development of a logo, and branding, and a new website. We were fortunate enough to have received funding from the province and are now proceeding with these processes. The public are being invited to participate. As well, we're proceeding with bringing all administrative employees under one roof, which has already happened, and so that there are going to be some benefits from that. So for the past year, some of our employees have worked out of separate buildings. This was neither efficient or effective. So as a temporary measure, and I emphasize the word temporary, the employees were relocated into a building at 61 Academy Street. We will also be going through a strategic planning exercise which will help us determine if a new facility is required, possibly replacing the other ones. Our new Chief Administrative Officer has been in place since January 8th. And so we're now well on our way to developing much needed policies and bylaws to replace the ones that had been in place in the former incorporated municipalities. So as we do that, new bylaws will incorporate our new responsibilities to provide services in the former unincorporated communities as well. Fundy Albert will also be purchasing a new fire truck to replace an outdated asset, as I mentioned earlier. This is a requirement mandated by the National Fire Prevention Association and will help us ensure we're able to provide a responsive fire protection services. Lastly, we'll be preparing a work plan to address the increased demands on our Public Works Department. The approved 2024 general operating and utility budgets uh, will be posted on the Village of Fundy Albert website. A hard copy of the approved budget will also be available for viewing at the municipal office. If you would like to see that in person, please contact the Chief Administrative Officer at 506-734-3733 or by email at the address shown on the slide to arrange an appointment. So that's it for the general operating budget. So now let's turn our focus on to the 2024 utility budgets. The utility budget for the Village of Fundy Albert includes total expenditures of $1,321,874 and revenues from other sources of $264,695, and those revenues include such things as surplus from previous years and so on. And funding of $1,057,179, which are to be raised through user charges. The utility budgets are comprised of the water and wastewater utilities for the former villages of Alma, Hillsborough, and Riverside Albert. While the utility budget is shown in one amount on the single document, it's made up of three separate companies that are paid for by the users in each municipality separately. So the users of the utilities in the community of Alma, Hillsborough, and Riverside Albert are paid for only by the residents in those communities. The residents in the community of Hillsborough do not pay for the water service or the wastewater service in the community of Alma, and neither does any of the other two communities pay for any of those services that are available to taxpayers in the communities of Hillsborough. So it's only users who have access to the utilities in question in the three former incorporated municipalities who pay for the services. Taxpayers who do not have access to these services, whether in the former incorporated municipalities or in the local service districts, do not pay. So that's an important point to make. Slides 29 and 30 illustrate the projected costs of each utility and the charges to each user by unit. So as you'll see in the community of Alma as an example, the water charges, or the cost to operate the water system, are $153,638. Wastewater, the cost of the wastewater system annually is $154,770. So the total water and wastewater charge that is to be paid by the users is $308,408. And similarly for Hillsborough and Riverside Albert. Hillsborough's total costs are $497,220. Riverside Albert's total costs are $251,551 for a total of the $1,057,179 that I mentioned in the previous slide. This slide shows the subunit, so Alma, Hillsborough, and Riverside Albert, what the total water and wastewater charges are. The equivalent users are the number of units that would factor in by looking at each resident or business or hotel separately and determining how many units there are per each one of those customers. So as an example, a single residential property would have one unit, whereas if they operated an apartment, there might be two. If they operated a hotel that had many rooms, there might be several units. And those units are all tallied and shown as an equivalent user. So then that translates into the water rate for each unit, the wastewater rate for each unit. So for the community of Alma, the total water and wastewater rate per unit is $1,360 yearly, paid quarterly. For Hillsborough, it would be $840 yearly, paid each quarter. And Riverside Albert would be $939 annually, but paid quarterly. So here we look at the rates for water and wastewater rates for 2024 as compared to 2023. So for example, in the community of Alma, there's been an increase of 52.98%, Hillsborough 5.4%, and Riverside Albert an increase of 8.93%. So where did those increases come from? So there has been a general increase in the cost of repair parts, electricity, and insurance. In Alma, the cost associated with the construction of the new water supply has increased the cost of the water rates significantly. It includes interim financing costs for the municipality's portion of the project, of the total project, the new water project, which is $816,000. The utility rate for water in Alma also includes the cost of a temporary water supply from Fundy National Park that was part of the measures taken last year because of the crisis for water that was happening in the community of Alma. This year's costs are now estimated at $62,000 for that temporary water supply. In Alma, also, the wastewater lagoon requires considerable repairs to resolve deficiencies that were noted in a wastewater system audit and were conducted by the Department of Environment. In Riverside, Albert, there is a water treatment plant upgrade that is ongoing, and those costs are included in the rates for residents of the water and wastewater residents in the community of Riverside, Albert. And in Hillsborough, there are costs associated with phase one of a new well development project. So that pretty much concludes the presentation that for this particular video. As I mentioned earlier, if you do have questions, please forward them to our Chief Administrative Officer at cao@fundyalbert.ca. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.